This is a true story that not many people knows about, only a few. It's lost in history. But this is a story of the first white man in recorded history to ever step into the Tennessee Valley. His name was Hernando De Soto, a Spanish conquistador looking for land and gold to claim for Spain. And we'll look at his expedition into East Tennessee and what effects he had on the Indians. Hernando De Soto was born around 1500, born to a poor family. So as he grew up, he wanted to be part of the conquest of the conquistadors of the new lands. So he joined the expedition into South America and attacking the Incas and conquest of Peru. And he done a lot of pillaging there, and they stole all the gold. So when he got back to Spain, he was a wealthy man by his part of all the plunder that they got, the gold of Peru. So he retired. But that didn't last but a few years. He got tired of that wasn't his kind of life. He wanted exploration. So he became the governor of Cuba. And after about a year there, in the year 1539, he set out an expedition into Florida to find gold in the southeastern United States, now we call it, North America. And here they brought all their supplies. They had 700 men, soldiers, and over 100 horses, and all kinds of pigs and livestock to support them. And they had brought slaves along too. Now when he got into Florida area, he started meeting Indians. First thing he wanted to do was somebody tell him where the most powerful tribe was, the most wealthiest Indians, the most powerful chieftain was. So he wanted to meet them people, and where's the gold at? And as he went from village to village, he would put his demands upon the villagers, and what was theirs is now his. He conquested everything that he could, and he took a lot of slaves for bearers of his supplies on his expedition. Every tribe they encountered, they would go before the chief, and they offered chief loyalty to Spain and their loyalty, that they would be okay. But if not, they issued a dire warning to them, and I quote, "With the aid of God, we will enter your lands against you with force and make war in every place by every means that we can and are able. We will take you and your wives and your children and make them slaves, and will take your property and will do you all the harm and evil that we can." Well, I guess that was a strong ultimatum. Now, a lot of these Indians, they didn't go along with this. So they usually go ahead of them from tribe to tribe, spreading the word that they was on the march to look out for them. And a lot of them fought back. And here's what the Indians used at the time: war clubs, hatchets, rock hammers. They had a few swords, spears, but primitive swords. Bow and arrow was one of their best weapons, but you could see how primitive they was at the time, and they done what they needed to do with these weapons. The Spanish weapons consisted of the early version of the musket, black powder. It was real effective. It was just coming on good strong around the 1500s. And you had the crossbow, which was really effective. It was really accurate. And it had a variety of shields, swords, daggers, pikes. And here the old crossbow, it was really deadly at close range. It was really accurate, quick to load. Hear the old black powder musket? It was real effective. They had a few cannons too that they used from time to time on these Indians, but I would say they was real cumbersome across these mountains. They probably had to dismantle them and drag them. But here's a really weapon they had with their cavalry, their soldiers on the horses. It was the Irish wolfhound, and they would train these to kill people, and they would turn them most loose on the Indians from time to time. You can see here how devastating it was. They couldn't outrun them. But this is like the Sherman tank of the day. A soldier with full armor, sitting on a horse, with his war dog and their infantryman. They was real devastating. Now, as he worked his way up out of Florida, up through the southeast here, he was looking for gold. Well, he unwillingly didn't know at the time, but he walked right over the gold there in northern Georgia, northeast Georgia. Just didn't want to work for it. It was there in the ground. But as he went up through there attacking these Indians, their demands, some of them just wouldn't give in, so he would destroy them, take them slaves, take everything they had, burn their villages. And he was real cruel. Even the people that went along with him, he still took what they had, used them for bears and slaves. And if he couldn't get the information he wanted out of them, or thought they was lying to him, they would do the old Spanish Inquisition stuff. They would torture them, cut off legs, hands, ears, nose, to get any information they want. And most of the time they got what they wanted, but sometimes they didn't. These Indians didn't tell them everything. Now, as they worked their way up through the southeast, in the spring of 1540, they worked their way up through South Carolina into western North Carolina, going village by village, being supplied food, porters, whatever they need or whatever they had to take. So in the spring of 1540, around May, they crossed the mountains into the Tennessee Valley. And the first village they come to was the Cassili. And they laid eyes upon the Tennessee Valley. First place they come to was the Nollatucky River, and as the first village they come to was Cassili, they worked their way down it, and they were supplied food. And these Indians were friendly because they know what they's up against, so they met their demands. He rested here for a few days, and then he headed down the Nollatucky after being supplied with some food, and he headed down to the Nollatucky, went down to French Broad, and he started heading down along here. He was met by some Indians that the chieftain up from the next village had sent him up to meet them and welcome them into the area and guide them to the village. They went down along the French Broad River here in the Tennessee Valley. Here's their village they come to, of what it would look like. It's called Chichilla. It was heavily fortified, and hundreds of Indians lived here on an island. And this island here is next to Dandridge, Tennessee. It's probably less than a mile from the Douglas Dam. And right here you can see where it's at. This island is called Zimmerman's Island. And this island is probably 90 foot under the water now. It's under the lake. So there's no trace of it. It's a mile across in that area. Big part of the lake. And here's the Indians they met, the chieftains. They took them in and welcomed them and gave them kindness and food and shelter and everything. And these were simple people. They lived off the land. They raised corn, vegetables, anything they needed there they could get out of the ground. here's all the different varieties of corn that they had at the time. And they done a lot of fish out of the river and the wild game around, and they shared it with them. And here's what the kind of huts they lived in. Some of them lived in teepees, but some of them lived in like this in their villages. And he stayed here for 3 weeks, resting his men and his horses from coming through the mountains. They was wore out. And while they was doing this, he'd send out scouting parties, would go for dozens of miles around the surrounding area exploring. They say that maybe he went as far north as the Holston River around Jefferson City, and as far south as the foot of the Smokies around Pigeon Forge. Now, they've been into this expedition for over a year now, and a lot of the men died, sick, wounded, and they was fed up with this expedition, and they enjoyed this country. It was beautiful country here where they was in the Tennessee Valley. So I think a lot of them, now this is just a theory of mine, I think some of them deserted, since them being Spanish and Portuguese, and they just deserted to the mountains with the Indians, and they intermixed with them, intermarried, and they just stayed hid in the hills of East Tennessee. Because it's just a theory now that when white man, the English, come in here, that these people were already here, and they didn't know where they come from. Now they're doing DNA testing now to determine where they come from, but that's another video. So that's just a theory of mine. Now, at the time he was getting ready to leave, he asked for 30 women and some porters and food. And they would agree with everything except for the women. Said they'd give him an answer in the morning. They all got together and said they weren't going to put up with that. So they all evacuated the city in the middle of the night. Went to a nearby island. Now, he sent 30 horsemen and 30 infantrymen to find them. And when he found them, he couldn't get to them because the water was too deep. So he got them to agree with just giving him some porters and food, no women. So he went on down through the Tennessee to the Little Tennessee River from the French Broad and done the same thing on them settlements just like he did before. And he went on down into Georgia and Alabama to the land of Tuscaloosa. And there's where he met his big challenges at. Here's the big mound builder cities. A lot bigger villages. Well, anyway, they wasn't going to put up with him, so they set a trap for him, but it didn't work out with the weapons that they had. There was 200 soldiers killed, and about 2,500 to 3,000 Indians was killed. And he burnt the city down. And he lost most of his supplies. So here he continued on. He could have went onto the Gulf for resupplies, but he was afraid his men would leave him if they ever seen the ships. So he went back up into the interior of North America. And you can see his route here. But he did make a great discovery here. He discovered the Mississippi River, the first European white man to ever say lays eyes on it. Now, he caught a fever in the June of '42. Now this fever got worse and worse till it got him down where he was just bedridden, and it wasn't long after that it took his life. So they didn't want the Indians to get him. They took him out in the middle of the Mississippi in the middle of the night and dumped him off the raft into the bottom of the river, hidden forever. Now, what men he had left, he had less than 300 left of all these battles diseases, and you can see in green here the route they took. They went down the Mississippi, along the coastline to Mexico to an outpost and left. Now De Soto killed a lot of Indians and done a lot of bad things, but he made a lot of discoveries. But the worst thing he could done for the Indians to kill them was to bring diseases to them that they had no immunity to, like smallpox. It wiped out all the villages and 90% of the population. And people come in here 200 years later, who built these great mounds you see in Georgia and Alabama? Well, they're all gone. Them people died off from disease. Now De Soto, he made a lot of discoveries, but he was a cruel explorer. Of course, that was just a sign of the days for the Spanish conquistadors. They named bridges after him. Here's a bridge named after him. High schools named after him. And a lot of other little places. Even named a car after him. It didn't last long though. So all throughout the southeast, the route he took, you'll see these signs. He made a lot of discoveries, but he made a lot of enemies too. He made it hard for the next white man 200 years later to come in here. The Indians always resented that. So, I thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this bit of history. And I'll see you next time.